Hey, you guys. So tonight we get to talk about, I have to say that this might be one of my favorite body systems. And so the topic for this evening is the endocrine system. And we're following up an entire 6-lecture series on the nervous system with the lecture on the endocrine system, and there's a really specific reason for that organization. If you think about the nervous system, we spent 6 lectures getting super solid with the idea that sensory input has to somehow come in and be communicated through the nervous system to a neural integrator, brain or spinal cord, to an outgoing message that instructs effectors or doers about what should be done next. So the nervous system was this whole coordinating, integrating system allowing communication in the body. The endocrine system is also a big integrating, coordinating system. And in fact, the nervous system and the endocrine system work really closely together. There are a lot of similarities between the nervous system and the endocrine system. In fact, the hypothalamus, as you well know at this point, a lovely brain structure that you find inside your head, the hypothalamus is really the person in charge of coordinating the entire endocrine system almost. So a brain structure, a nervous system structure, is coordinating this endocrine system setup. So we're going to look at the endocrine system. We're going to look at the anatomy. We're going to look at the histology of the endocrine system. But before we go there, I want to take some time to really compare the two integrators. You have good experience with the nervous system. You have lots of experience with the nervous system. Hopefully it wasn't all bad. And now let's build on what we know about the nervous system. Let's use the structure that we know for the nervous system to understand the endocrine system and how it functions. So that's where we're going to start. Okay, let's roll. Because both the endocrine systems and the nervous system can act as integrators in various physiological pathways, you should know, what the differences are. What are the characteristics that we're going to see in these integrating systems? So the first thing that we want to look at is, what is the message? They're integrators, but how do they communicate? And in the endocrine system, hopefully you're like, dude, I got this. The endocrine system communicates by hormones. And hormones are chemical messages, right? That makes perfect, and that's it. So some gland that's involved in the endocrine system is going to secrete a chemical, a hormone, into the blood, dump it into the blood, and send it off to do its business. And that's what makes it endocrine. In the nervous system, the message is in the form of an action potential. And don't worry, I believe potential, I think this is the topic of our next one. An action potential is electricity, and that says electricity. Action potentials are electrical messages that travel down neurons, which are the primary cell in the nervous system. The electrical message is not the end of the story. There also is a chemical component of the nervous system's communication techniques, and that's called a neurotransmitter. And this is chemical. So see me write chem right there. I fit it in. Endocrine, only chemical. Nervous system, we've got an action potential, which is electrical, and the neurotransmitter, which is chemical at the end. So you can see that our messages themselves are different. Now, there's a couple of differences as far as, who's getting the message. talk about the effector. Who is the target? In the endocrine system, the target is anyone, true story, anyone who has a receptor that matches the hormone that got dumped in. So if a nose cell has the receptor, then the nose cell can be the target. If the stomach has the receptor, then the stomach can be the target. So it's a general, the endocrine system acts generally. The nervous system, it's extremely specific. The neuron has to touch. Now, I say touch, and I mean that vaguely. They're not actually making contact most of the time. Most of the time, there's a space between the neuron and the effector, but that space is like really tiny. And so for all intents and purposes, especially compared to the endocrine system, they're basically touching. Neurons touch the effector. So the target is super specific. Like if you do not touch, if the neuron does not touch the effector, then that effector is not going to be a target of that neuron. There is some speed questions here. The question is the speed of information getting out, information transmission, and the speed of the effect. So let's do transmission. How quickly does the message get out? And effect. How quickly does the message translate into action? And here's the bottom line. The endocrine system is slow. We love it anyway, but it's slow. Nervous system, wholly fast. You know that action potential that we were talking about? This is crazy talk. 268 miles per hour? What? That's crazy fast. So the message, when there is a neural pathway involved in any kind of system, the message from the neuron cell body all the way to the effector, that message can travel at 268 miles per hour. It'd be really interesting to calculate the speed of a hormone and how quickly it can go through your whole body. I want to say that your blood travels through your whole body in like a minute. And, of course, that's going to vary depending on how quickly your heart is beating, so how active you are. But a minute to get to a target, and even then, like, did the hormone actually hit the receptor that it was supposed to hit? A minute to get all the way through as opposed to whatever it would translate into if it's going 268 miles per hour. The nervous system is a lot faster. This is interesting. The effect duration, like how long does the effect last? And in the endocrine system, it's long-lasting. So when the endocrine system acts on something, it stays acted upon. The nervous system, the message goes out, the information is barfed, the effect is immediate, and then it goes away. If you want to keep the effect happening, you have to send another message at 268 miles per hour. So how do you say this? The nervous system message is short-lasting. I know there's a better way to say that, but it's quick. It's almost instantaneous. It happens at that speed, and then it stops. So if you want to get if you want to see it again, you have to send another message. And that actually relates to the intensity of the effect and how you can actually increase the intensity. So if you wanted to amplify the effect, for example, you send one action potential down your little neuron to your effector to try to get something to happen. If you want more effect than that, well, all you're going to have to do is increase the number of action potentials. and they're super fast, so you can. And you can actually get kind of an exponential increase in effect if you fire your action potentials really fast. To increase the effect of the endocrine system response, you just need to increase the amount of hormone. And that there's a whole feedback system responsible for making that happen. Now, the rest of this entire lecture, we're going to focus just on the endocrine system. So we're going to start out by looking at, dude, what is this hormone that you speak of? And some of that's going to feel like review. There actually are multiple different kinds of hormones. We're going to look at them, how they differ in their chemistry, and then how they differ in the effects that they come up with. And then we're going to look a little bit at some anatomical structures that are important in the endocrine system, at least at this point for us. We're not going to spend a huge amount of time talking about endocrine anatomy because the endocrine system really we will see its involvement throughout this entire semester. It's involved in pretty much everything. All right, let's talk about hormones. The first thing we should definitely do before moving any further is define a hormone. Hormones define the endocrine system. So an endocrine organ is something that produces a hormone. So we should definitely have a sense of, dude, what is this hormone you speak of? So we're going to play a little Pictionary because, you know, that's how I roll. What did I just draw? Oh, it's a little bit, I don't know. My Pictionary skills are phenomenal, but perhaps not perfect. A hormone. I didn't draw a hormone yet. The hormone is a chemical dumped into the, now you know what I just drew, blood. That's a blood vessel. This end looks super wonky, like I don't even want to pretend like I'm trying to figure out what it looks like. But the hormone is any chemical dumped into the blood that acts on a distant target. Compare this, my friends, to a paracrine or an autocrine chemical. And those are chemicals produced by cells that are dumped out into the universe, but they're not dumped into the blood, and they don't act on a distant target. They're dumped into the interstitial fluid, and they act autocrines on themselves or paracrines on their neighbors. So a hormone has to be dumped into the blood. And hormones, okay, I just spent the entire last section telling you that hormones were really general and that their action was really general. But now I'm going to tell you something a little bit different because I want you to appreciate the fact that, yeah, they're general. It's not like the neuron, which, okay, I can't help it. I just have to draw you a picture here. Here's my neuron. Here's the axon. And here's the axon terminal. This is where the neurotransmitter in a neuron is dumped into a synapse where it affects or causes action at a single cell. And that single cell is part of an effector organ. Do you see how specific this is? If I were to draw another cell over here, I'm sorry, that little axon terminal is not touching this cell. It doesn't matter that this cell totally has a receptor. It's not going to be affected. This is very specific. Don't get confused. But this isn't like anybody will be affected by the hormone. A distant target that might be affected must have the receptor. So if this is my target, this is only a target if it has the proper receptor embedded in its cell membrane. Its neighbor, who is lacking the receptor, is not going to be a target. So in that sense, the hormone, the endocrine system, can be very, very specific. And only folks who are expressing the genes that produce these specialized receptors will be able to make something happen. So the hormone is going to bind to the receptor, and then signal transmission is going to happen. We're going to have some kind of message received by the cell is going to ultimately initiate some sort of action. And keeping in mind that these actions might take us a while to make it happen, but eventually we will definitely get some sort of action happening. The thing that happens, how are we going to get action from here? We get binding, and then what happens? Well, that depends on the kind of hormone that we're dealing with. And there are actually three kinds of hormones that we're going to look, three types of hormones that we're going to look at. And all the hormones that we're going to talk about in this class will fit into one of those categories. And so we can basically learn the general categories. Okay, this kind of hormone acts like this. This kind of hormone acts like this. And then once we know, oh, well, progesterone is this kind of hormone, then we kind of know the action that that hormone is going to take. We're going to start out with steroid hormones. Coming at you. The first kind of hormone we're going to look at is a steroid hormone. Now, steroid hormones usually end in the word sterone, like testosterone or progesterone or aldosterone or cortisol. But you'll remember cortisol is also a steroid hormone just because, check this thing out. They all kind of look very similar, and that's because they're all made from cholesterol. If you remember, cholesterol is a lipid, and as such, it's hydrophobic. So you can imagine it's like if you barf steroid hormone into your blood, you're actually going to be putting something oily or fatty into your blood. And so it's this hydrophobic substance. That actually is going to affect its mechanism of action. So let's go make a list of characteristics about the steroid hormones that are significant to us. First of all, just like any hormone, they get dumped into the blood. That's the first thing that happens. So there's my little bloodstream, and here's my little steroid hormone. Okay, now the anatomical structures that produce steroid hormones, usually they're made in the gonads, which in females, ovaries, and in the fellas, the testes, and they're also made in the adrenal glands. So this is the anatomical place where they come from. Who are they going to affect? That depends on who has receptors for the specific hormones. So the next question is, how do they act? How do they carry out an action? And what are some key characteristics of the actions that they produce? Well, first of all, because they are in the blood, and yet they're a hydrophobic, they don't like water. And basically, blood is water. So they're sitting inside this bloody water going, this is not cool, and they'll all clump together like oil and water unless they are being carried by, they have their own little special carrier boats. I'll even make a little flag there so that you remember that this is a little boat. It's probably made out of a protein, which is hydrophilic, and so then it can float through the water, but it can float through the blood, but it needs that carrier in order to be able to do its job. Now, we will have some kind of target cell, and here's the interesting thing. I'm going to tell you, of course, you should assume that how is the steroid hormone going to have an effect? It has to come in contact with the receptor. That's the first thing. So if you have an organ that does not have testosterone receptors, then that organ, it doesn't matter how much testosterone is in your system, that organ will not be affected because it doesn't have the receptors for it anyway. But steroid hormones are unique. Most of the time, the receptor is not embedded in the cell membrane like you would expect. What am I drawing right here? Most of the time, the receptor is floating in the nucleus. And this is a hint to its action, like what it's going to actually do. Now, think about this. Steroid hormones are hydrophobic. So they can easily diffuse through cell membranes. And look, in they go. And look,
through the cell membrane that is the nuclear envelope. And look, they find these floating cytoplasmic or nuclear receptors. So this is a receptor that's just chilling. It's floating in the nucleus. They can float in the cytoplasm. Sometimes steroid hormones do have receptors that are embedded in the cell membrane. I'm going to put them in all the locations. But most of the time, they're actually found inside the nucleus. This is where they are most of the time. Because they're phobic, because they're hydrophobic, the steroid hormone just diffuses right in. Now, the action, that's how the hormone gets in. The action happens when the hormone binds to the receptor. So that's stage one. It's in the nucleus. So go ahead and take a wild guess. Like, what do you think is going to happen? You're actually going to produce, step 2 is going to be to produce some kind of what? Some kind of machinery. Does that work for you? Some kind of necessary stuff to increase protein synthesis. What does that make you think of? Well, the whole purpose of DNA is to contain the directions for building proteins. Hopefully, you're getting a sense that, dude, these proteins that we're building are actually super important. If we're going to increase protein synthesis, it isn't just like, okay, go, make some proteins. It's like, we need this specific protein. And that's what this receptor plus this hormone stimulates. If protein synthesis increases, then you end up with some sort of product, some sort of protein. What is it? An enzyme? Is it another substance that's going to get dumped out somewhere? Does it have a specific effect on the heart? Does it have a specific effect on the size of the gonads? Who knows what the actual product is going to do, but the product causes the action or the impact. And here's the deal. Steroid hormones are slow. If you think about it, I hope you remember from Bio 1, the process of protein synthesis. You have to transcribe the DNA into messenger RNA. You have to translate the messenger RNA into a protein. That happens in the ribosome. And while it happens shockingly fast, if you think about the fact that it's happening in my body right now a million times, that's really fast, but compared to our other mechanisms, you'll see that, whoa, it's actually kind of slow. That process takes a significant amount of time to end up with a functional, viable protein. And here's the other thing that is true. There's a 1-to-1 hormone to product ratio. So essentially, I don't know how to say this, 1-to-1 hormone to product ratio. And that just means if you want one protein produced to stimulate an action, you have to send in one hormone, and then it'll happen. If you want more protein, then you just have to send in more hormones. So you can't, the only way to amplify the effect is to increase the amount of hormone that you've produced. So it's slow, and you can't amplify it. You can't, amplifying it is like, dude, let's take one hormone and send the message to everybody in the whole world. Sorry, if you want the message to get out there, you have to, each hormone has to deliver the message personally. And that just takes a while. That's slow. That's why if you start taking steroids, you're not going to see a result tomorrow. You're going to see a result in a couple weeks because that's how long it takes for those steroid hormones to have an effect. Let's talk about amino acid derivatives. These guys are kind of a set of in-betweener hormones.
So the adrenal glands are major players in the endocrine system, and they actually are also not entirely endocrine structure. So first of all, guess what this little thing right here is? If I were to draw the rest of it in a very odd manner, that's a kidney, but of course it's a kidney. It's a little strange, but that's what its intention is. The adrenal glands sit on top of the kidney. They're actually surrounded in kidney fat and very well protected on top of those little kidneys hanging out there. It's made of two distinct zones. We have the adrenal cortex, and the cortex is the outer part of the adrenal gland, and the cortex is true endocrine tissue. The medulla, the adrenal medulla, is not endocrine tissue at all. In fact, it's actually neural tissue. So like the pituitary gland, the adrenal gland is both endocrine and neural tissue. The medulla of the adrenal gland produces, it's so weird. Well, it makes sense if you think about it as nervous tissue. It basically produces neurotransmitters that are involved in a sympathetic nervous response. So think about, I mean, we spent a huge amount of time talking about the autonomic nervous system and sympathetic responses versus parasympathetic responses, and the medulla, the adrenal medulla, gets a message. It's actually like an autonomic ganglion. It gets a message from the central nervous system that, oh, Dector, something big is about to go down, and it dumps epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are basically adrenaline, directly into your blood supply. We got a lot of strategies in the sympathetic nervous system to get the message out fast if you see a bear. The adrenal medulla is another amazing strategy for getting the message out there fast. In fact, maybe you've noticed this before, all the times that you've seen bears, especially since we talk about bears all the time in this class. But perhaps you've noticed that when you have a sympathetic nervous response, you see the bear or whatever the thing is that is frightening you, it often, like, the situation passes, the danger is gone, and yet you're still super amped. That's because your adrenal medulla dumped in a whole doo-doo load of epinephrine and norepinephrine into your blood, and it's still circulating. Like, it takes time for that message to get out there. It also takes time for that message to go away. So you stay amped after a sympathetic nervous response, even though the stimulus is no longer there. So, okay, we know what the adrenal medulla does. What about the adrenal cortex? Well, the adrenal cortex has 3 layers, and we're going to start, I'm just going to be like this, 1, 2, 3. And you're going to remember that because I've made a mess on this page, and I don't have enough room to write about my 3 layers. So I'm going to go superficial to deep, and I'm not going that way. And I'm not going that way either. I guess, can I go up? Nobody knows where I'm going. That's where I'm going. I just went up. Up is a good direction to always go. All right, let's talk about our layers. You know they have names. We can actually see them in the microscope. So when we do the lab, we're going to look for our layers of the adrenal gland. You can see them, and then you're going to associate the layer with the name and the hormone that is produced, the example hormone. Okay, superficial layer number 1 is called the zona glomerulosa. Now, before our next exam, you are actually going to learn about a structure called the glomerulus. The glomerulus is found in the kidney. And so zona glomerulosa produces a hormone called aldosterone. And aldosterone, guess who the target is? The kidney. Aldosterone affects the kidney. And it actually affects the pee that you produce, the urine that you create. It affects how much sodium is in there and how much potassium is in there and good stuff like that. It won't be hard once we get to the kidney. It won't be hard to remember zona glomerulosa producing a hormone that's affecting the kidney because you will know a lot about the glomerulus. Zona middle layer is called zona fasciculata. Fasciculata. Bring me a latte, please. Maybe I've had too many lattes. Please, fasciculate. I'm not sure how we're going to exactly remember this from sick lattes, but this is a biggie. The middle layer produces cortisol. Produces other stuff. I'm just throwing out there the most commonly known hormone that is produced, and the zona glomerulosa also produces other stuff. But cortisol is a hormone that is released during a stress response, and it stimulates glucose outpouring into your blood so you have energy to run away from the bear. Okay, that's cool. Cortisol actually impacts, the target of cortisol is lots of stuff. Lots of tissues have receptors for, lots of organs have receptors for cortisol. And my third layer is called, oh, lordy, zona reticularis. Reticularis. But, of course, another reticular something. Zona reticularis is the deepest one, and it's producing sex hormones. And it's actually mostly androgens. And when we talk about the nervous system, we'll talk a little bit about the some of the other places where you get sex hormones. Like, actually, we're going to talk about that in here. The ovaries and the testes also produce sex hormones. In the ladies, most of the sex hormones produced here are androgens, which are like testosterone and dehydroxysteroid. And so we actually have cells that turn those androgens into estrogen so that we don't get super buff. All right. We totally did the entire adrenal gland. How do you feel? The next thing we're going to talk about are, we're going to like glump together a whole bunch of other true endocrine organs, but obviously if I'm glumping them all together, we're probably not going to do a lot of detail on those guys. All right.
Okay. If a hormone is not a steroid hormone, so it's not derived from cholesterol, and it's not an amino acid hormone, so it's not derived from tryptophan or tyrosine, then it must be a peptide hormone, and that truly is the process of elimination. Everything else are peptide hormones. And I'm going to tell you about the mechanism. First of all, peptide hormones are, like all hormones, they start in the blood. And they are hydrophilic. They're made out of proteins, so they're not going to be hydrophobic. And, oh my gosh, I'm having a very hard time deciding on what color to make my peptide hormone. I can't remember what my other colors were. Because they are not hydrophobic, they're cool with water. They're like, water, homie, let's hang out. They don't need a carrier. Sometimes they like to be in a boat. Sometimes, and I'm going to put my little flag on this boat just so you remember it's a boat and not a receptor. Sometimes they like the protection offered by a boat, but they don't need the boat in the same way that a steroid hormone would. The mechanism, this is awesome. Peptide hormones initiate a second messenger response. And this is something that we will see again and again and again in lots of different environments. Peptide hormones, this is the mechanism by which they get a response. other systems, I believe smell involves a second messenger response. And so this technique, this tool, this mechanism can be seen in other systems. But let's draw ourselves a cell, and I'm going to illustrate for you what a second messenger system or mechanism looks like. First of all, your hormone is your first message. So what does this tell you right here? Somewhere along the line, we're going to get a second message. And here's how that works. First of all, the hormone binds to the receptor. The receptor is embedded in the cell membrane. So first, hormone binds. And it binds to the receptor, and we already know that a key tool in the communication toolbox is that proteins, when they bind to their people, they change shape. So the receptor, when it binds to the hormone, it's going to change its shape. And the act of changing shape, receptor changes shape. The triangle means change in Wendy land. And the shape change causes a cascade of chemical reactions. Now, you can go and find out what the G protein and all the proteins involved in the cascade. You can, most of the time, these things are known. For this class, all we're going to have to do is know that, you know what, it's going to initiate a cascade of chemical reactions to result in our second messenger. And our second messenger, receptor changes shape, initiates a cascade of chemical reactions to produce my second message. And in most cases, guess who my second message is? If you know me, you know that I pick orange for my favorite high-energy things, and this is related to my very favorite high-energy thing, which is ATP. This is something called cyclic adenosine monophosphate, or CAMP. Do you want me to write that down for you? Cyclic adenosine, like adenosine triphosphate, ATP, but it's only monophosphate. Oh, show. Cyclic adenosine monophosphate, CAMP. CAMP is my second message. Now, CAMP, depending on where it is and what's going to happen, CAMP is the enzyme, or the CAMP activates. CAMP is then going to activate the enzymes or whatever needs to be activated to make an action happen. And then so number 6, I wanted to draw like a little enzyme. Okay, here I go. Ready? Enzymes always look cool like Pac-Mans, but watch this. This enzyme isn't going to work unless it gets some CAMP hooked up in there. So when CAMP hooks in, then that enzyme is like, I'm a Pac-Man, and it goes around. And this is one of the characteristics of the second messenger response. One CAMP can go around and activate a whole bunch of enzymes. So actually, now that I've drawn it like this, it makes me think that, no, that's not an appropriate way to draw it, because it's not like the CAMP gets used up. The CAMP can go around and activate and activate and activate, which means that a second messenger response can be amplified. So it is fast. Now, that means one hormone can come in and activate 1,000 enzymes. 2 hormones can activate 2,000 or 5,000 or 12,000 hormones or enzymes. And so essentially, where with the steroid hormones, if you wanted one outcome, you needed to put in one hormone. Here, you put in one hormone, and you can get holy madness of response. And that's one of the really unique things. Now, since the response can be amplified and it's fast, now think back to the amino acid derivatives that had a peptide hormone-like mechanism. That means that your adrenaline, your epinephrine and norepinephrine, these guys have a very fast and amplifiable effect on the cell. Dude, that perfect. Throw one hormone in. Don't you get that feeling? Like now we know why. When you almost get into a car accident, you don't even have to be in the car accident. You don't even have to know what the hell just happened. And you have this rush of adrenaline, and the response is instantaneous. Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases, you start to sweat, you start to like dilate your pupils, let more light in. Like the responses are immediate. And you get that feeling like the stimulus comes in, here's the car accident about to happen or the bear about to chase me. And all of a sudden the effectors are like, whoa, seriously? Like I didn't even process in my brain that that was actually a bear over there. And yet all of this already happened. Evidence that the second messenger response is not messing around. What a great strategy. Okay, we're going to take, you now have some tools. You have some mechanisms to understand different hormones and how they act. And we're going to look at similar mechanisms and hormone actions all the way through the course. Most likely in your integration project, you're going to have some kind of hormonal thing going on. So you're probably going to need to be aware of or feel comfortable with these processes. Now we're going to take a step back and look at some of the endocrine anatomy and some specifics between the hypothalamus and the pituitary. Here's my little half head. I always get a little disturbed looking at this picture because it looks like my little small blondie boys, but that's okay because if I could look inside their heads, I actually would, as long as I didn't have to chop their head in half. All right, so take a look at this location. Anatomy students should definitely be aware, what is this structure right here embedded down in the sphenoid bone of the skull? That would be the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone, and it's the pituitary gland. And so you can see here, this is sphenoid bone, and you can see that this pituitary gland is nestled down inside that part of the sphenoid bone. And if you take the bigger picture, here's pituitary, nicely protected, very important. I have pituitary and hypothalamus split into two sections, but really, it's really hard to talk about them separately because they are so intimately connected in structure and function. Superior to the pituitary gland and literally connected to it is the hypothalamus. So you can see that this space up here, this area, this is my hypothalamus. And if you take a look at this, it's really significant because the hypothalamus literally reaches down. It's all, doesn't it look like that is hypothalamus that's reaching down into the pituitary gland? And that's not on accident. The pituitary gland has two parts, and the anterior part is endocrine tissue. The posterior part is actually neural tissue. It's actually brain. It's an extension of the hypothalamus. And that structural feature is going to be very significant when we look at the function of these two structures. So the hypothalamus, it's basically considered like the master of all homeostatic responses. The hypothalamus controls the whole thing. And in fact, before we can talk about specific interactions between the hypothalamus and the pituitary and the distinctions between ant pit over here, this is the ant pit, and post pit back here, we have to have a little bit more anatomy. This, I don't know, those of you who've had anatomy from me know that portal systems, I find portal systems fascinating. Portal systems are two adjoining capillary beds, and we're going to talk about portal systems because I just can't help it. Most of the time in the circulatory system, and relax, don't freak out, this is definitely just diagrammatic and just for illustrational purposes. Most of the time, we have one capillary bed. You have your arteries coming in and feeding a capillary bed where gas exchange and nutrient exchange takes place with all your cells. In fact, all your cells are like some distance, some tiny little distance away from a capillary or they're going to die. So you've got all these capillary beds where exchange happens. And then all the dirty old blood flows back into the veins, which head back to the heart. The heart sends them to the lungs. We have capillaries in our lungs. Now we have gas exchange occur there, and we get new fresh blood to send to the body. There is no reason to have two capillary beds in sequence because capillary beds are where you get dirty blood. In anatomy, we talked about the hepatic portal system, and that was a place where you did see two capillary beds in sequence, where all the capillary beds surrounding the digestive tract took all that oxygen-poor but nutrient-rich blood to the liver. And the liver, in another capillary bed, sorted through the nutrients and made sure that there was nothing poisonous there before dumping all that nutrient-rich blood from the outside world in your intestines into the regular circulation. To me, I look at that portal system and I go, brilliant. What a great idea. Let's have two capillary beds in sequence so that we can filter out the blood. Well, the portal system that exists between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland is a different kind of portal system. But in this one, this is going to be important when we look at how the hypothalamus communicates with the pituitary gland. And can you see here? I have a capillary bed from the hypothalamus, and I have another capillary bed where? With ant pit. So the anterior pituitary actually has its own additional capillary bed. Why? Why would you do this? Well, here's the deal. The hypothalamus produces releasing hormones, and there are, I believe, 6 of them because there are 6 hormones produced in anterior pituitary. The hypothalamus dumps releasing hormones into this portal system. What? And then those releasing hormones, you don't dump them into the whole circulation, dilute them out there in the madness. You dump them into the portal system. And then they go, let's not stay in a capillary bed till we get to ant pit because we can certainly go faster if our vessels get a little bit bigger. So we'll get them a little bit bigger, and then we'll branch out again into another capillary bed where now we're going to deliver the hormones to ant pit. The message when those hormones come, the message is you got to release some different hormone out into the bloodstream, out into the general population. In this way, the hypothalamus is able to control the hormones produced or released by ant pit. The hypothalamus is also tightly related to the posterior pituitary gland. And that one, dude, this is fantastic. Neurons in the hypothalamus literally pass all the way down into the posterior pituitary, and essentially the hormones produced in posterior pituitary actually are made in the hypothalamus and are just stored in post-pit. And post-pit upon a message from the hypothalamus will release the hormone into the general bloodstream. There isn't a portal system between the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary. You'll see that that's not necessary. There isn't a releasing hormone for the hormones produced in the posterior pituitary. I guess we've talked about hypothalamus and our pituitaries and how they are unique and different from each other. And now in the next section, I'm going to talk about all the different hormones that we're dealing with here. All right, my friendlies, we're going to finish this up strong with a picture of our own picture of the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland and the hormones that are involved. You now have the anatomy, but let's add in the hormones, and that will help us evaluate the physiology. Okay, so I'm going to draw in black my essential anatomy. And you are going to go, oh, sure, I know exactly what she's drawing. Because this is my hypothalamus up here. And this is my pituitary gland, but notice how I'm drawing my pituitary gland. So this is who? Ant pit. And this is post pit. Let's do post pit first because he's easier. Ant pit is a little more complicated. That's cool. Let's start out by reminding ourselves that the hypothalamus has neurons that literally stretch into the posterior pituitary. Done. Posterior pituitary really is nervous tissue. These neurons that start in the hypothalamus produce two hormones, and those two hormones are stored in the axon terminals of the posterior pituitary. So two hormones stored here, and they are oxytocin. That's the one that makes you happy and feel like you're willing to take care of the little parasite you just pushed out of your body. And vasopressin. This is the one that keeps you from peeing the bed at night. Two very important hormones that are in the posterior pituitary. Now look at this. How awesome is this? Hypothalamus, both of these, dude, let's make some more oxytocin so we can take care of our babies, and let's make vasopressin so we do not pee the bed at night. We're going to talk about the mechanism of vasopressin when we get to the kidneys. I'm not really going to spend much time on the mechanism of oxytocin, but you can see that there's an anatomical connection that allows direct communication between the hypothalamus and the pituitary. I have one more thing I want to draw for you, because of course we cannot have any of this, none of this matters unless we include, dude, this is a pretty wonkadoosical blood supply, but please forgive that. And know that these two hormones, if we want to release them, they're going to have to get into the bloodstream. So don't forget that part. All right. The hypothalamus also has neurons. We'll make them green this time. This time, these neurons have releasing hormones that they, okay, so let's just make a little RH to notice that these releasing hormones are going to be dumped into what? That portal system. Remember that thing? So this is my picture of my portal system between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. So I just want you to remember that the releasing hormones are going to be dumped into this portal system, and then they are going to come in and act on ant pit cells. And ant pit cells are then going to produce hormone. Once they receive the message from the hypothalamus that, dude, you got some hormones to release here, they release hormone into the main circulation to go out and affect the body. I want you to list out all of them, and I'm out of room. So you have to, oh, goody. I'm going to go over here so that now I'm going to make a list of the releasing hormones and their hormones that are made in ant pit that are released into the bloodstream when the releasing hormones message is received. Did you understand that? All right, are you ready? Let's do this. So we have a releasing hormone. Oops, I'm going to change my color because I want to keep it color-coded, that my releasing hormones are coming from the hypothalamus. And these things, again, like they're hormones because they're getting dumped into the bloodstream, but they're produced by the hypothalamus, which is nervous tissue. One of my releasing hormones is called thyrotropin releasing hormone. Thyrotropin. And thyrotropin releasing hormone is going to act on who? It's going to act on an ant pit hormone, an ant pit cell that is producing what hormone do you think? How about thyrotropin, dogs? And thyrotropin is a thyroid hormone, also known as TSH. Thyrotropin releasing hormone is also known as TRH, I believe. We're going to do an activity in the lab associated with this lecture that has to do with little dead rats that were treated with different hormones. And you have to, based on the what you see from the rats, you'll have to figure out what hormone they were treated with. And thyrotropin, we have releasing hormones and ant pit hormones that are involved in this whole process. So you're going to have a chance to mess with these and do a lab activity around that. Okay, more releasing hormones. More. How about corticotropin releasing hormone, which causes the release of adrenochromatoin. Now, here's the thing. So I'm just going to take a little aside here. Ant pit produces these guys, but thyrotropin, or thyroid stimulating hormone, goes out and stimulates the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormone. What? Seriously? The message has to come from the releasing hormone, and then you get the stimulating hormone, and only then do you get the actual hormone from the endocrine gland. Same thing here. Corticotropin releasing hormone produces adrenocorticotropin, which acts on the adrenal glands to produce cortisol. Wow, that's crazy talk. Like I said, we're actually going to play with this stuff in lab. We also have growth hormone, releasing hormone, which produces, what do you suppose? Growth hormone. That's pretty straightforward. And then we have gonadotropin. Yeah, really. Gonadotropin releasing hormone. Faux show, doggies. And that guy's involved in the menstrual cycle, produces luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. True story. We got to get some follicles produced if you're going to have a menstrual cycle. I have one more. We have one called somatostatin, and I'm writing this down so you can see that some of these, like somatostatin, actually inhibits the production of ant pit hormones. So somatostatin actually inhibits growth hormone and thyroid stimulating hormone. So those actually act as, it's a negative message. Don't produce these things. All right, how do you feel? Fantastic? That's a lot of stuff to have. You're going to want to make sure you have it well documented in your external brain. We will play with it in lab, and so that's really handy as well. And that's it. Endocrine system, cha-ching. I talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.